Good morning. This is the curriculum instruction meeting for August 10th, 2022. Okay, so no public comment. There he is. Very good. We were just getting started. Perfect timing. There is no public comment, Mr. Jay. And the minutes from the June 8th meeting, are there any corrections, additions? All right, and they will stand. As you just get here and get unpacked, Johnson, do you have any comments?
No. I see the parking lot's full. The school parking lot was full.
Oh, yes,
this morning
yes,
time I went
yes,
there.
and we were just talking
Teachers have
about
arrived.
that. And they have.
The
So
schools are buzzing.
I hope they have a good day back, and I will say now that I'm gonna leave at 11 to get up to the Thurmont Elementary School tour of the construction reopening. First I said, no, I'm sorry, it interferes with D&I, and then they moved it to a little bit later, and I looked at the agenda, and I asked Dr. Cuppett, and it's like, so I think we can get it done, but I'm gonna buzz out with that. All right, so let's get started.
Well, good morning, everyone. And just to make sure, I believe we've introduced Scott Murphy, but Mr. Jay, this might be the first in-person meeting. I'm not sure if you've seen, but
I've seen him in the board meeting.
board meetings, okay. So we're excited to have Scott here. We've been preparing for this presentation, having some comparing notes on how textbook approval occurs in both his previous district and ours. So today, we know that textbook approval has become a topic of interest not only in the public, but amongst the board. And so we felt this would be one of those C&I timely topics, not the routine updates that we give. And so we wanted to walk you through the process today. So the textbook process is governed by Regulation 500-38. I'm going to walk you through the specifics of that today. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about some of the successes and challenges we've had with it, as well as some process improvements that we're implementing for the 22-23 school year. So, definition-wise in the regulation, it identifies a couple of different types of books. And I believe the process was differentiated based on the impact of that book or the use of the book. So there are two types, type 1 and type 2, of foundation textbooks. And so a foundation textbook, type 1, is for any required course or any grade level requirement. So for instance, English 9 is required of all students. If we were to select a textbook in that area, that would be considered a foundation textbook type 1. Other required books that meet a grade level requirement could be something, for instance, like math in grade 3. We're all going to take math in grade 3 when we're in grade 3. So that is considered like a census or high impact type of text. The other type is type 2, and that's really governed for like elective courses. So some of them mentioned in the regulation too, like AP psychology, right? So it's not every student's going to take that. It's only going to be when they take that elective course. Both type 1 and type 2s, according to regulation, should be reviewed every 8 years. That's kind of considered, at least in this regulation, as kind of a lifespan for a text. I will say there are some texts that we look to more frequently, especially if the topics in there, there's either, for instance, sociology might have updated theoretical topics. One of the books that we're updating has outdated CPR information. And so when CPR changes, the old textbook has to be updated. And then these are all approved by a committee that's led by curriculum professionals. Now, the difference between type 1 and type 2 operationally for us then is, well, who's on that committee? Because the approval process is the same, but who's on that? And so for the type 1 that is required, you'll see that there is a curriculum specialist, a school-based administrator, 2 teachers identified in that discipline and school level. So 2 middle school English teachers for that type of book, 2 AP psychology teachers. Well, that's a type 2. For instance, when we did our most recent look at the elementary ELA programs, we had teachers from all grade levels represented. Okay, it says we only required that two, but we made sure we had grade level representation. Parents of students enrolled and community member knowledgeable in the subject area. So that's a type 1 group. And if you go to a type 2, it's a little bit smaller group because again, the impacts aren't quite as broad. Curriculum specialist, 1 teacher, 1 community member knowledgeable, and 1 parent.
Those are required or recommended?
That is required by the regulation.
Okay.
Yeah. And I will tell you that, you know, and you guys are aware of this as board members, finding parents to serve on these committees can be a challenge. You know, there's no all call like you have with a board committee per se. I'll just give you one example. We reviewed the textbooks for the Black African American Studies course. Actually, I had a community member who serves on our calendar committee. He said, "Hey, I'm excited about this course. Do you need help with anything?" I said, "Actually, yeah, we need a parent to serve on our textbook approval committee." So, community members are usually pretty easy for us to find. We have a lot of great relationships with our community college. We have a great relationship with our colleges, and those are often a great way for us to find some people to serve on that group. So the difference between that type 1, type 2 is the size and scope of the committee that's going to review that. Now, one caveat we'll put in here about, so for instance, if we are currently using an AP psychology text, and it's edition number 9, and edition 10 comes out, and we would look at that and review it and say, well, there's no really major substantive changes here. That does not go through the full approval process, it's simply renewed. It's kind of like an RFP renewal, right? We're just going to renew that book. So that's just a caveat. But if there are substantive changes, or it's a new book, maybe for a new elective course, or we're replacing a previous program like we'll do in mathematics next year, then we go through the full process. Now, the third type of book that's out there is called a supplemental text. And so supplemental texts are just that. They're not the main text or print materials that we use in a course. So for instance, if we have a textbook in Modern World, we don't currently use open source materials, but let's say we have Modern World as a textbook. The full textbook would actually go through the type 1 because it's all students are required to take that course. They would go through that. Let's say there was a small supplemental text about a topic that's within that. It's not going to cover the whole year. It's going to be tied to a unit. That supplemental text would go through this even less comprehensive process because of the way the regulations are laid out. This might include ebooks, versions of that as well. And so these are supplements to any kind of foundation or type 1, type 2 text. There's no 8-year cycle associated with that. In fact, what we find a lot of times is that supplemental text changes as we move through time in the district. That review is just a curriculum specialist and a teacher. And again, same thing, minor updates or changes can be reviewed without any kind of public display. But these do go through the public display process. I'll show you in a minute. So you got foundational type 1, type 2, you got supplemental. So that's how the books are broken apart for the different processes. So now that all of those are defined, let's talk about how the process itself works. So the first thing is the regulation outlines how do you select what you're going to go through the approval process for. Certainly professional judgment, our specialists, yeah, Mr. Dick.
You say regulation, you mean COMAR? You mean COMAR for regulation?
Regulation.
Speaking of COMAR required rules? Or
No. This is I'm sorry, we said this before you came in. This is regulation 500-3.
Just wanted to double check.
Yep. Yeah. So our specialists are certainly aware. I had done a presentation for CNI. I think maybe Ms. Young, you were the only one who was here. When we talked about the changes that have occurred in the textbook industry, do you recall that one? It used to be that there were as many as 30 large publishers of textbooks. There's about 4 now because they've been bought and purchased and picked up. So, and remember, we're a large district. So we can't go to what we call garage band vendors who can't produce the kinds of books that we need and the digital materials that we have we like to have with our curriculum. And so we end up really working with like some large vendors. There are some smaller vendors in some specialty areas, elementary health, one of them. But in general, our folks know what's out and available. Then we'll reach out to other districts. Hey, I understand that you're using, whatever, say, Into Reading or Into Mathematics by H&H. Hey, what's been your experience with it? What's your thought? And then we, especially in the supplemental text area, we often get suggestions from teachers, administrators. We even had community members. We had a community member not so long ago recommend a text for the Black African. Hey, this is something you look at. And we certainly do respond to that. So that's kind of how you get the books that you're going to evaluate. So then, once you get those committees together, your evaluation committees, you develop some documents and kind of train them in what they're looking at. We often have the vendors presentations about the books. What are the strengths? What are the highlights? What are the digital tools associated with it? How do those digital tools interface with our student information system? And so we have a team, a solutions team led by Amy Portis, who will make sure that those things work well. And so then we go through what are the evaluation considerations. So these are the 9 bullets. The first 4 here, certainly we want to have the textbook match with our curriculum, right? Is it applicable? Does it align to the standards of whatever course that is? Is it engaging for kids? That includes age appropriateness. Does this middle school book seem a little too young for kids? Are the illustrations too young? That type of thing. Vocabulary topics developmentally appropriate for the students in the intent. So, for instance, a book we might select for a junior in a social studies area versus a freshman, we would want to kind of consider the ages of those students. Are the illustrations and activities appropriate for a culturally diverse student body? It's an important part of what we look at. Large print or adaptive format is available. Those are textbook companies, especially the large ones, they are very used to doing this. That's easy for them to produce for us. Suitable supplemental materials for students, so they're, because sometimes we'll get a main text, but there might be, back in the old days, it used to be there was a DVD in the back. The teacher would be able to show that. But what are the things beyond that might be appropriate and helpful for students? Availability and quality of the guides and the support materials for teachers. So if I'm a teacher and I'm looking at the teacher copy, are there a lot of supports for helping teachers understand the topic that's in there? So I will tell you, we're using a material called Phonics Week. If you remember when we bought the foundational skills program in K-2, one of the things we liked about that teacher guide is there was actually embedded professional learning. It wasn't long. It wasn't like they got to watch a big video. It was just a couple of snippets about why this was critical and critical things to do in your lesson. Our teacher was like, I didn't know that. That's very interesting. That wasn't covered in my undergraduate. Then there's the viability of the supplemental technology materials, and we say viability is we'll work on our system. Mr. Gardner say it's safe for our digital ecosystem. Is it easy for teachers and students to use? And there has been a significant move in the textbook industry to ensure that there are digital versions of it, right? So whether it's just the digital version of the text that could be shared with kids, but some programs have digital learning software that's associated with it as well. So we evaluate all that. And then make sure that things are published in compliance with the National Materials Accessibility Standards. That's something we're aware of. Again, the larger publishers, very good at this. They have whole divisions that deal with accessibility. So those are the criteria. So when the committee's going through, these are the kinds of things that they're looking at. Now, there might be other content-specific criteria. So for instance, recently with the evaluation of the ELA materials, there was a lot of, Jen Ralston, our curriculum specialist, made sure there was a lot of looking to ensure that the materials are aligned with the science, right? So that's kind of like an evidence-based approach, which is actually not mentioned in the regulation, which Mr. Murphy and I, and we've been talking with some of our team, feel that that's probably going to be an edit that we would put forward. So when there is an evidence base available, that should at least be looked, right? So mathematics, in early literacy, early childhood education materials. A lot of these companies have done studies to show their effectiveness with young populations, students with disabilities, just reading development or mathematics development in general. You're going to find less research about an AP psychology. That's the book. That's the one they're using. It's not going to be an evidence base per se. And so we do think that when there is an evidence base or a need for an evidence base, that should probably be now enshrined in this regulation. So we'll likely be making some edits and changes to this as we improve our process, and they'll go to Dr. Dyson for update.
And the national materials accessibility standards, that would be things like text to speech or large print or.
Yeah.
So, I'm sure you read this, so you said updates to your process or to the policy?
It's regulation, so this will be updates to the regulation, correct? Yeah. So that might be including, Mr. J, process improvements. We'll talk a little bit about some of these things that we're doing in response to the feedback. So now we're at the point where the committee has reviewed it. They've looked against these rubrics, and then they're saying, okay, this is the book that we think is the best. And what we, as curriculum leaders, often ask them to do is, what's the next best one you can live with? Because, and this is why the board has asked, why are we approving 2 of these? Well, when you approve one, that vendor knows I'm the only game in town. When you approve 2, then there's a whole conversation about what's the price of the material. So for instance, we might approve the book that we really want, might be, say, $110. The second one we could probably live with might be $75. We can have a conversation with a higher end vendor and get them down to a number that we can actually probably. And unfortunately, depending on the budget, sometimes we do have to pick our second choice because it's the only one. So that's why sometimes you'll see 2 things go forward for the same program. And so we are, Mary Jo Richmond and her team are responsible for getting these out for public display. When we have electronic versions, we make sure those are available to the public because it's a lot easier to go to the library physically to work on that. We use the Frederick County Public Library as one of our display sites. I will tell you, in the last 2 years during the pandemic, they were not open. So we moved that to central office here, but it is now moved back to the public library. And those are on display from a Monday to Monday for the public to review. There's the library. We typically do it at the main branch, but occasionally we'll move it to, say, the Thermont area as an equity. We'll move the materials so that people can check.
So what I'm hearing that you had them display here at the home center and you moved back to the library, I thought it was to keep that dynamic where we look at the same time.
So one of the improvements moving forward is they will be in both places. We felt it was important to move at least one set of review materials. So now we're asking for 2 full sets. One will be at the public library because those hours are better for me, right? So if I work all day and I get home, I can't get here to come in here, but I can go to the library at 7 o'clock at night and go in and read. And that's why we feel that's an important part of our process from a transparency perspective. And then with the materials, or you can get it from our website, is a textbook reaction form. And that's where somebody in the public can give you positive feedback, it could be questions, it could be negative feedback. We accept those up to 21 days after the review period. So it gives families plenty of time to give their information, or members of the community information back to us. Now, if we, Mr. Dick.
So when you say they're available online, can you print it out or can you fill it out online? You should know they're online.
I'm not 100% sure right now. Whether it's a fillable form,
Yeah.
and by the question, I'm assuming that you feel a fillable form is probably what you need. Yeah, we'll look at that, Mr. Day. That can be one of our process improvements. Okay, so if we get no responses or only positive responses, then media services reports back and we push forward. It comes through for the board on consent agenda. Public meeting. Now, if there are negative responses, or even just questions, like, a lot of times a public member might ask a question, we don't want that to go unanswered. And the curriculum specialist will contact those individuals to discuss those concerns and hear those folks out. Doesn't mean that we might not move it forward anyway, but at least we've addressed that. So recently we had three public comments on one of the ELA programs, and I actually reached out to all 3 of those folks. One parent did get back to me, we had a nice conversation about it. hearing her perspective, her viewpoints. The other two chose not to respond, but we did our obligation, met our obligation to try to find her. And so it's a valuable part of our process. So that's how books get in. Once you guys approve, then we go ahead and purchase or go ahead and negotiate. And we select it and we buy those books. They're typically large programs we drop ship to schools. So for instance, the Into Reading program right now that HMH will be providing to grades 3 through 5, those materials are delivered directly to the schools, and the schools unbox, get it distributed in their hands of kids. And we often get this question, so what about a book we're already using? It's gone through approval process. We have one probably about, I was still a principal because I served on the committee. Somebody has an objection to something that's so there's a process. It's actually the next regulation order 500-39, where it says there's a reconsideration of a previously approved textbook. Okay, so there's an entire regulation that says, okay, what happens? What are the thresholds where a process is put in place? Basically, it says this: if we've already had a request to review it and a request to reconsider the material, have gone through the review process and we're keeping it, we're going to keep it when we get the second request. But if we've not reviewed it and we have enough citizens, I think if I remember correctly, it's like six folks that have said, hey, we want you to review this, then we'll go through a review process. It convenes a formal group. I served on it as a principal for Social Studies Alive, if you remember, grade 3.
I was on the committee to help
Yeah.
select the books.
So we would review written testimony. I remember we had folks that came in and shared their testimony. We were able to engage. It was also kind of like a hearing in some way where they came in and shared their concerns. And then typically then we make a recommendation about whether we keep it, whether we don't keep it. And in this case, there were supplemental materials because one of the biggest concerns was they felt that there was not enough balance in the treatment. And so we got supplemental materials to bring it back into it. And that was kind of the resolution of that particular thing. So there is a regulation if in case somebody has a concern about something that's already. All right, so current challenges and successes. So one of our successes is that the committees that review these are often more broadly represented than what's required. So we're having discussions now. Do we actually say that maybe there's a type 1, type 2, type 3, and maybe type 1's need a broader committee and type 2's need. So we're kind of saying, like, what's the way to operationalize this? You always have the right to add more people to the process, and that's never bad, right? So we currently do that. The 8-year cycle is not directly paired with funding. So prior to the recession in that 08, 09, 10, where there were dramatic cuts made in the public education, not only here but across the country. Prior to that, there's about $2.4 million in textbooks in the budget on an annual basis. And that was the funds whereby the 8-year cycle was approved. So specialists knew that coming in the 2010, 2011 year, I have these text programs, they're at year 7, we're going to be able to use them next year, therefore I need to start a review process. And generally there was enough funds to fund the 8-year review and replacement. Then in that lean period, there was one year where there was no textbook money. There was one year where it was a couple $100,000. And now over time, the board, thank you, have gradually added money to that amount. So now, in the last couple of years in our department, we've had adequate funding. We've got a big math program next year. You'll hear about that during the budget cycle. And we've left it out with some great grants too. So for instance, the Into Reading, which is a $1.7 million program, it's not coming out of local funds. It's going to be 6 years of that is being funded by the Maryland Leads grant. So that's huge for us. So we just wanted, so if you were to say to Kev, do we have any textbook programs that are over 8 years old? The answer to that is yes, but there's far fewer than there were 3 years ago. So we've really been able to try to update and modernize. Because we do think our kids deserve to have the recent stuff. They shouldn't have very outdated. This is what I was saying about parents. We usually just recruit them. And there have been a couple of times out of full transparency where the parent we picked also happened to be an FCPS. That's one area that I'd love to be able to generate some ideas on how we do that. Whether we go to a full announcement of an upcoming textbook committee and are interested, kind of how we do the calendar committee or the flat. That might be an option for us. And then enhancements to communications and transparency. And I will tell you that the process has been public. What has been challenging for members of the community, what we're hearing, is that we didn't know about it, right? And so we've been trying to use communications to enhance the transparency. And so we started some of these at the end of the year, and then we'll be putting, before the first cycle comes out, we'll be doing this for the upcoming year. So here's what we would hear from family. Well, I didn't get an email about these textbooks. And so we would have a conversation with that person. What happens is when you do your find out first, you select what you want to hear. Everybody selects emergency closing. They select the information that they want to get from the schools that their children are in. And sometimes that's all they select. Occasionally we'll get people that also select employment opportunities because they might want to consider working for the district. But when it came to those, I guess, more detailed categories, they didn't select that. So when the email went out, it didn't show up in their find out first, where people who had selected it were receiving it. We're now just sending that find out first communication over the main channel, right? So skip the selection because it was being categorized. Let's go ahead and send it out in the main channel. The balance is that does put it in a bunch of people's inboxes who can hear this, right? So we hear that from parents too. So that's one thing we're doing. We're going to put a link on the very first page of fcps.org. If you go into fcps.org and you put textbook approval, that first hit on that search item comes up to the page where all the information is. As we said, we're going to have both a Board of Education approval location as well as the library, so we're returning to that. Those are probably the biggest changes that we're making right now to communicate that out to our families. And then Mr. J, I will check on the fillable form. And public affairs has actually been also blasting it out on social media as well, which we had not had in previous. So we do want to thank our friends in public affairs for working with us on this. And we should expect to have these improvements in place for the start of the cycle this year. All right. So another challenge that we have is the textbook industry is catching up to the needs of districts, especially for those that have high standards for DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And what we found is there are no perfect programs. In fact, Dr. Harris's team reviewed the two ELA programs. More concerns with one program over the other. And you can tell the industry is trying to respond, but they're also doing it in a very interesting political context because there have been states, and a couple of them are big players in the textbook purchasing world, because there are some states that purchase their textbooks on the state level. And so if you're a publisher and you get that contract, well, that's obviously financially beneficial for you. And so there have been some states that have actually put in legislation saying you can't have some of the things that other states would want. So that's an interesting political context that I think our colleagues in the publishing industry are trying to navigate. But that is something that we have found to be in conversations with our provider. So those are some of the challenges associated with that. The one area that Dr. Harris and I had some conversations was around, now that the board had produced the equity policy a few years ago, 444, and put greater emphasis on this for staff, we think that the regulation itself may have to have a section where we really talk about formalizing the equity perspective, maybe a standardized rubric that all specialists would use. And we've even considered having, so for instance, if I'm the specialist who's going to start this process with the committee, that group receives some kind of like equity professional learning before we go. So like, what are the look fors, those types of things. It has to be a really easy functional rubric. We don't want it to be a theoretical, but what are the practical look for from an equity perspective? And so we're currently in conversations across multiple departments now to come up with adjustments, continued adjustments to improve this process. And again, those edits or those changes in language would go into superintendent's advisory committee. So we would run a copy around and we would go into SAC and the documents. So certainly if you guys have any thoughts, whether it's physical forms or other things, if you can let us know. Any questions about that rather long, detailed presentation about textbook improvement?
Can I jump in? So I'm actually on the textbook reaction form, and it's a fillable form, but there's no like link to click to submit. So,
So you have to download
So
it.
you basically get to print off and submit it physically as well
yeah.
Yeah.
What?
as.
Basically save it.
Is what it saves.
Well,
Is it a
if you
PDF?
fill it out, it is a PDF.
Hit Control S.
Could we inquire about having that be filled out? You know,
Yeah,
on-
but then where does it get emailed?
What, the feedback, it's probably on the website, it says who you sent.
That's a lot of steps.
This is a separate link for textbook reaction form. It opens up the PDF, which is fillable, and it has,
Yeah, I'm just wondering if that should just be a link to a Google form.
That's what I
Easiest
was
way to do it.
wondering, like, it's like
And then
all
we
the
can
Google
put a,
forms we get that
We can
just.
put the notification trigger, that when you receive a response, the Mary Jo's team will receive, oh, you received a response.
I think that would be entirely appropriate
Yeah.
for what we're trying to do. The next thing is that, I thought, maybe I misunderstood, I thought you said from our main page, you could easily navigate to.
So if you put textbook approval in the search,
But that you have to actually search.
But they're gonna change that, right?
our goal is down on the right side of the main page, there's a C. Here's the challenge that public affairs has, right? If you have 183 links on the front page, the complaint would be, I didn't see that in the list, right? So but we think because of the recent attention around this, that we could add it as one of the blue links
A
to
quick
the
link.
bottom right. And I believe it's already on school websites and their drop down on the right side, I think Mary Jo's already got it. So if I'm at my school's website, I can also navigate.
And then, looking, I'm actually at the textbook school review page, and the current, like right now off our website, and it says display page for the 21-22 school year.
Right, because we have put up the 22, 23. Because the cycle doesn't run all the way through the summer, so there,
This is June tentative,
yeah.
based on the
Right.
July 2022, 23 meeting calendar. So just, just looking at this, I get the perspective that this is old material.
The new material should go up in the next product.
And perhaps maybe, I don't know, when the textbooks were for review, this is a suggestion.
Yep.
Just the cycle. Because it has a June 2022 review list link, and it, it has a June 3rd, 2022 memo here that you can click on, but maybe this in that intro, kind of like a summary paragraph of the textbook cycle dates on an annual basis. Like we start the review in June, right? Or, well, no, when do we start the review? Really?
First reviews probably won't come in to you guys, they probably won't get you until September.
Okay.
We have backward map from the board meetings.
I think just the summary paragraph, of what the general cycle is, so that the average person can read it and understand where we're at in the cycle right now. And where, what the actual cycle start date and end date.
Right. So, okay, I'll check with Mary Jo, but I think what happens is new links get added as it's now time for public. So you're gonna start seeing over time, the 22, 23 cycles will all start to show up, but you're saying if there's a master paragraph above that.
Yeah.
Got it, okay.
Just brief explanation of us, the textbook review cycle starts and whatever approximate time of year is for whatever academic year, because we know the curriculum development and textbook, they take a long time, it's like,
Yep.
it takes a year-long process, and that's not clearly indicated
Okay.
here, and I think that would be helpful for the public, so we can explore that. I know this is on for textbook review, and then it has like links to like the media specialist. What is the process for library books?
So library books are governed under a different, there's a library policy. And then there's kind of I don't remember the name of, Mary Jo can tell you the exact title, but it's like a criteria for selection of library materials. And so typically what happens is if Miss Yo, who's the media specialist, she is interested in putting a book in, she gets that book and have that one positive review from reputable review sites. And if they have it, then it can be selected and put into the library. So remember, the library is a very different forum than classrooms. Classrooms are curriculum. So for instance, when there's been disputes about books, books that land in the world of curriculum are handled very differently by the courts. There's more latitude given to boards of education for control of what's there. When you get into libraries, as the Supreme Court says, are the great marketplace of ideas. And so getting books in is a different process, and removal is different. So for instance, I don't know if you guys remember, but back in the day when Harry Potter hit it, there was a lot of accusations of witchcraft and Satanism and all that kind of stuff. And so there were some cases that came out. One, I think it was in, I forget, it was in the South somewhere. Books were removed outside of their normal removal process. And parents who were not complaining about the book and wanted to then file an injunction, that went all the way through the courts. And the court says, well, you didn't follow your own process, so go back and use it when they did the book stay. There's been cases where books have been put in what they call segregated locations, and that's not permissible, right? To say that only because it stigmatizes kids who want to go get those books, right? So libraries are dealt with very differently in the courts and so we have a different process associated with that. And I don't know the policy number right off the top of my head, but I can get back to you soon.
Would you mind going over that for us for a bit?
The library approval process? Sure.
Because I guess looking at that, just based on what you're saying, it really doesn't fall under the Board of Education or whatever comes to the Board of Education. It is purely up to the media specialist.
So the process by which a book gets into the library, you guys, not you guys, but previous boards have said that's okay. The process by which a book is challenged, you guys have said okay. If we were going to put in front of you the new library books, you'd be looking at approvals of, I think Mary Jo told me somewhere between 7,000 and 8,000 titles a year. And so as a board member, do you want to say you're the one that has approved every one of those books, so we probably wouldn't have a reasonable period of time to review them? Or do you want to say, I'm approving how a book gets in, and I'm approving how we challenge it if we have a concern with it? And I'm okay with both of those processes, and the rest is just natural processing. So what we could do is bring to you, okay, here's the current materials that we use to guide the selection of books. Here's the current process we use when a book is challenged. There you go. That's your information. That's your update. And then you as a board could make a decision about what you want to do about your policy.
And the day, the board is money purchases.
Right. Absolutely.
I think one of the differences,
It's about virtue of that is where our responsibility lies, in that policy, and the money that purchases the book.
Yeah, you approving how they get in and how they get challenged, and the fact that you're going to pay for
Mhm.
it, out of budget. Yeah, but, you're currently, the regular cycle for classroom materials, which is different, governed by a different approach, right? That keeps you plenty busy, because you see the number of books that we send through to you. Libraries would be,
I have no desire to have a slow roll. I do have a desire to see policy.
absolutely.
policy or regulation. And I think the difference comes in, as we've seen, it's been pointed out in the public, that a textbook basically is going to be put in front of every student, that there's no choice there. And where library, the family,
Self-selected.
Self-selected, the family can have input.
And that's the biggest distinction courts make when they rule cases around books and books. In curriculum, they've even said in their opinions, look, we don't necessarily agree that these are the books you should have taken out of your curriculum, but you have the right to do it. And that's actually in the opinion of one of the Supreme Court justices, where they say, we're in the library here, you just can't take a book out because you don't like the topic. It has to be typically, it's not age appropriate, nude or vulgar. There's a Miller test associated with this. There's a whole lot of established court case around libraries. And that's why I say I think the board's focus, most boards traditionally focus on how they get in, how they connect. And so when we do that, we would bring Mary Jo Richmond to that conversation with you guys. We can get that on for you in the fall. We'll have to find one of the meetings that's maybe a little bit lighter in current agenda or juggle some stuff around. We should be able to get that to you easily.
I think it'd be a timely topic for everybody, yeah, well, to put on there, because we're reviewing textbook policy, and I think libraries fall under the same umbrella as, resources that we're providing to students.
Sure.
And I think differentiating the role of the library versus the role of curriculum would be beneficial.
Sure.
So, this is all rolling back to communication and transparency.
Yeah, sure, absolutely.
I'm not finding a regulation, but when I do a search, so.
It's actually, I think it's only governed under roll call.
Okay.
Yeah, I think if you searched under library, just the term library, I think I know the number, but I don't want to say that loud. Dr. Harris probably knows.
I was gonna
I'm
say,
looking.
you're like the kids in school, that's what I was gonna say.
I actually have one in my house.
Well, and this quick search here, this is kind of like, wasn't on our original topic, but this is a related area, but we have a regulation on disposal or donation of obsolete textbooks and library media books.
Yeah.
So we're putting them under the exact same umbrella.
For disposal.
For disposal,
For trash.
but where they're treated very separately in terms of selection
Sure.
and,
Well, and I would say that regulation, as John said, is less about the book and more about property accounting. Just like we have other regulations on how we get rid of things.
I'm not seeing anything related to the library. I see copyright, I see.
Well, you know,
yeah.
I think it's just one of those that might have an unusual title.
Yeah.
I did have a question. So, you mentioned before, on the future, you really want to follow through this. You mentioned that, there was no all call for parents to review books. And that's going to change. You're going to see
think
how-
All calls to find parents to serve with committee.
Yes.
Well, that's one of the things you have to talk about. Is that the best way to do it?
Well, if you have trouble finding them, you're saying they're not hearing from you. So that's what we're,
Yeah.
you get to what's coming.
Yeah.
You push your parent prospect and you say, hey, consider an offer. I would have to for that.
Yeah, what I wanted to was you're getting is maybe that all calls should go out in time with a list of all books that we're going to review for the coming year.
I think twice a year. You're gonna have stages of, you're gonna have a one big session of review, yeah, but I think that all calls will be good there. Then the other one I had was mentioned before here. Let's see. So, you now sending out the email list for books to all about the, what's being considered as considered everybody now. That's great. So the supplemental process, that, can that be, looked at for updating, that, it's like supplemental, it can fall under the, textbook, like, two report?
So you have foundation type 1, type 2, and then you have
I
supplement.
think type two had the, type one, yes. It was type two. So I'd like to see supplemental fall like with type two. So I think right now I'm just having like supplemental book is going to be like, that can be, it can seem trivial, but it could be a very big hinge moment. So if it falls under the type two, or it's going to be lumped in there, I think that would be a lot more transparent than just saying, hey, what we do right now, if I heard correctly, I think you're wrong, on the notes here, I have it wrong, that supplemental is kind of like internal.
Right.
I would at least want to bring in a type two level for supplemental, that's not what we should.
So when we say internal, in other words, committee members are only internal.
Oh, well,
The approval process to go to the public is still.
Okay, so-
It's just And being in a committee of 8 to look at one small book that's gonna be used for one unit of instruction, a whole course.
There's still public exposure for years. So,
Everything governed under this
So,
textbook.
can you take a bit of that slide, for that one, make sure it's good direction on it?
Supplemental textbook?
Yeah, that was number what you put. Let's see, so it's a seven,
Seven.
okay. And here, so here, it's one teacher, I don't see a parent on this.
No,
So what what I need to do in a reservation, or the policy to get a parent?
well, we could add a parent to the regulation without you having to go through
That's
the
fine.
policy.
I want to see a parent like this.
Yeah.
You know,
So, Mr. Jan, I hear what you're saying. The challenge of that is the sheer number of parents we might need to do supplemental materials. So, one thing I would respectfully request is that we talk to our curriculum specialist and say, yeah, as a parent, tell me how that's going to impact either the timeliness of being able to adopt the book
Can I get that?
or just the sheer number of parents we can use. Right? So,
I guess what the problem solving is how do we make this process right here, how do we get the parents involved? It becomes a thing where it's more like, it's more indirect. Where here's something you send out, you send some notes back on it. Okay, maybe you those are taken into account, those are the emails, you send out, and people get email back, and they want to, or fill out a form or survey or something.
well, okay, so, but you're saying that you don't think that function would be served by the public review process where parents can do just that, email information?
So, but typically, everybody, type 1, type 2, we have a parent involved in the process. This right here is a parent at all. So what happens after this? And so after they approve it, we like it, we go forward, and we say, hey, what happens after this?
So that book, let me just give you an example. So I'll just make one up here. So let's say we have our American Studies book, of course, has a foundational textbook already. Remember, supplementals are in addition to something that's already been board approved.
We have a small war on the side.
Yeah, or there was like a new book about the perspective of African American soldiers' life in civil war. That would be a great supplement. The curriculum specialist and the teacher would review this. It would then go out for public display. It would be announced that it's out there. Parents would be able to look through it. They could provide a reaction form or not. If it's a negative reaction form, we respond to them, reach out to them. Doesn't mean we don't approve it. And it would come forward for the board to approve.
And so, now I would say, I like that, it's fine, but I was here on this slide. They're on this slide.
Yeah, so the way that I organized the presentation is, the first part was just defining the types of books. So we went foundation, type 1, type 2. Then we went supplementals, and then I started to talk about the process for approval. So the criteria that we use also applies to supplementals. And the process for public display, public feedback is also under all of these. All of the materials under the textbook regulation, whether they're type 1, type 2, or supplemental, follow the same public display and approval.
I can go with that.
Okay.
I think there's always the balancing of the need for input to making the system bog down so much that it becomes unwieldy. So, once we have that now.
I do have one more. And this isn't like directed specifically to what you're doing with your fine work. Dr. Lefebvre? Okay. So I'm looking at the supplemental instructional periodicals. Is it regulation? No. Yeah, right, yeah, regulation.
What number is that?
500-2.
Okay.
The date of issue was November 18th, 1977, and it was last amended in 2015.
Okay.
So help me understand, because in my other work, we review policies on a 3 to 5 year cycle, depending on, with COVID, it went to 5, yeah. Well, if it has been, okay, so even with our procedures, which is, the regulations, they get reviewed. So when I look at this, is this true, because it's signed by Dr. Perky? So
Sure.
what,
Say the number 500-2.
500-2,
Supplemental periodic.
someone helped me with the historical aspect of this, that it would have been reviewed since.
So I think there are two things at play here. I think
And this isn't directed at you, this is a broader issue.
This is.
And it's nice
first off,
actually at this point in my second year on the board to actually do things that, like, I would try to set
I don't
up.
take anything personally.
So,
I need to get yelled at. I'm taking it personally. But so here's where we are. So the regulations, I think, when we look at them, when staff sees something that is like problematic or just plain outdated. So for instance, we regularly update regulations when titles change. It's instead of to the associate superintendent, it's now to the deputy. But substantively, we usually have to say, when does the utility of regulation diminish or when it's not? And so what we're saying is when we started to look at textbook approval, and actually Dr. Seaton and I were having these discussions, these conversations about 2 years ago. We said, you know what, we probably need to get a review and data for that. So this one around periodicals, we can certainly look at that. If it's working and we don't feel there's any reason to be changed, then the 2008 change, my guess would probably editorial. There might be some people's positions listed here that need to be updated. So that's typically when we update regulations. I think I've been here 8 years, and I've been personally involved with bringing forward probably anywhere between 10 and 12 regulations. Superintendent's advisory committee will review probably like 5, sometimes 6 regulations at a meeting. That happens 3 or 4 times a year. So regulations are regularly updated. The thing about textbooks is that the political context around textbook has changed over the last couple of years. I'm not criticizing that one way or it is what it is. Politics affects a lot. Plus the industry changed a lot, right? So like, for instance, if this regulation said, for a foundational textbook, we have to go out and contact 6 vendors, I'd be like, well, we gotta change that, because there's not 6 out there, right? Because now, 20 years ago, 6 would be easy to do. So the regulations really, when we feel that there's something that's either hampering the work, is outdated, then we bring those forward. And sometimes, again, they're minor editorial changes, others go to the full SAC conversation process. A lot of work goes into them before that, and we've updated assessment regulations multiple times since I've been here. And sometimes the law says we have to, we realize that the law has changed and now the regulation.
Right, the accessibility part with visual law
Right.
is changing.
Yeah.
But that seems to be okay.
So we can certainly look at 500-2 if you like.
well, I just pulled one up from FCC, and it has like when the board of trustees approved it, and when it was revised, and there's like you can see the whole life cycle on there,
Right,
and
our policies, it tells them what
well, it was, so we do have things that haven't even been voted since we've done.
again, those are regulations or policies within the year.
Yeah, so these are procedures, so we have policies and procedures, and at FCC, we have policies and regulations. And that like gives you it tells you the shelf life. It's kind of like, I'm not gonna eat a can of beans that's got a date of like 2010 on there when you pull it out of the shelf. Like, you're gonna like look at it, oh, I haven't,
Yeah.
I think it's just good business practice to make sure we're reviewing them and say, hey, we don't have any changes we need to make right now. It's been reviewed. And then you just throw the date on there, so you know when the last time was. Because we just had a question on another policy with respect to the historical aspect of it, and there's like no cues into when that has been reviewed. So I think that would be tremendously helpful, because I'm sitting here thinking, wow, this is missing, like. when it's
And
not
as
that.
far as the policies, they do that now, but there was a gap of time before there was a policy committee, and they didn't do that, so.
And I haven't been on the policy committee. If I had been, that would have been like, one of the first things I would have.
But again, policy and regulations and different stuff.
But both of them get reviewed, so, or should be reviewed regularly.
Yeah,
And I would say, Dr. Jim, the regulations typically get reviewed. Well, first of all, you gotta remember, we're using regulations, right? So for instance, when that regulation right there, it's being used, if it's still working, then we're not sure why we would be teaching, right? Regulations should just sit, and then 6 years later, someone comes back and goes, oh, I wonder why. We use regulations all the time. I mean, I don't have time, our principals, when something comes up, go grab the regulation. When I taught school law, I always told them, I know you're learning about the Supreme Court justice right now. The first thing you grab when you're operating as a school administrator are the regulations and policies that govern your daily, your standard operating procedures, because they're all informed by things like the Code of American Regulations, the Federal Code, all that kind of stuff. And precedent, they're informed by precedent, right? So, you can see the evidence of that, but as an administrator, you're going to use the reg. We're using these regs on a regular basis. So when a new specialist comes in, they learn all about the textbook with the reg, we check all of our processes against it. When we see that there's a pain point or confusion or something like that, that's when we often bring forward regulations, say this needs to be updated. Is that a regulation conversation, Dr. Allen?
and I hear a lot with legislation, John Williams with MAID will say, well, the law said this, but if you look at the regulation, there's all the detail there that you have to take them together.
It all comes down to law to Comar to us. And either policies created or policies created that drives the application. And there are some regulations that are not necessarily good for policy. And there are plenty of regulations that are our. So there's an interrelationship. But I'll share that review and sign off, like basically, hey, Mary Jo, is the periodic thing still work with the new things? Okay, well, then we can send it up with no editorial change. I can.
All right, we had some of those titles are even available.
So,
So soup is.
I love that story.
Oh my gosh, I
Weekly Reading
No, I
Month.
mean, it's a periodical,
Those are my jams.
it's a book,
Oh, gotcha.
yeah, it's a periodical,
Right.
so.
I mean, if
No, I
you,
think it's good to have them reviewed.
I mean, reading through it reads sound, and it's nice to see that those things are still, for foundational, but I think we can also really add new titles, sure. But like, we still have weekly readers? Those still around?
Second.
Weekly readers, those still around?
Yeah, I think so.
That's awesome.
Well, 5 years ago.
Yeah, that's typically a lot, sir, that you do that.
That's one of the actually, the still working. It's good.
Yeah, well, for a long time, I used to put those on, back in the days, we asked parents to send
Yes.
us subscription costs, you know, we use that, now we do that. Any other questions about this day? I know, this is another one that would like to get out.
And do we have any group in SCPS focused on who we are? Open education.
So we've,
That's
so
a big
actually we
shift.
looked at, we considered an OER for elementary LA and called another district about it. And this is one of the single biggest complaints of the OER is that things weren't enough. It's open source, but you talk about a regulation set for a long time, the content will sit for a long time. Some of it's just reliability of the material, printing costs. We've got a good at OER related text work, but we need a print version, we're going to download it. We, Holly Bernard is probably the biggest user of OER. I think Monterey is OER right now.
Speaking of time constraints, doing at our next meeting for the foreseeable next 10 months, I'll be what the time for 11 o'clock also will be on virtual call. We put that in notes that we can have that set up.
And they are working on.
And that's great that we have this for our community, IPOs.
Can you clarify again, you'd like to be able to have a view to come in virtually?
Either I can come in virtually or I can call it either way.
Oh, yeah, sure. And then what was the second one about? Corinne?
Just that I'll also be constrained for an hour. This is a break. I'm
Got it.
a functioning teacher, so
Yeah.
I don't get all that. I wish.
But I guess you all, as far as your date and time of your meetings, I'll leave that to you guys as to whether the meeting is 2 hours, whether the meeting is 1 hour. Because if they're 1 hour, then we're gonna have to do some major.
I mean, do what you gotta do, I catch up with everything else. But
Yeah, okay.
just so you know, when I.
So keep the meetings for 2 hours. I mean, most of them are in and out for about an hour and 15, an hour and 20, depending on how many questions you guys have. Okay. And then, so the next one in September, we have health, physical education, and flat updates. We thought that was another common topic. Revisit some of the adjustments we've made, share some of the updates with you that we have. Let you know kind of what we're anticipating will happen with flat through the year. The school digital ecosystem, we may have to end up moving those just depending on what we're bringing to you as content. And we're not sure how much time you're going to need for health physical education. It might depend on the amount of public comment you have, number of people attending. So tentatively, we have digital ecosystem, Schoology, personalized learning, and then health. And once we have that presentation together and get a sense of the length, we may end up moving the other 2 hours. Just to give it the time it needs. I don't want anybody in the public to be here to think that we're rushing the conversation, or that public comment is being cut off.
Right.
You're doing it, right?
Yep.
Okay. Awesome. So we good?
Quiet over there.
Enjoy it.
They get a sign to go just in case.
Enjoy it.
Thank you all.